I'm Megan Skidmore, and welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts on a faith journey and all aspects of life. Join me as I bring this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the light. I firmly believe we normalize through more talking and engaging in discussion. More talking peels back, exposes, and erases the layers of shame associated with asking questions and allowing doubts. When we are more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. Hopeful Spaces is a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. It's a free monthly parent, ally, or caregiver support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. Email chc@dallashopecharities.org for more info. First Friday's free coaching, a confidential group to bring all the questions, vent frustrations, share fears, express doubts. Navigating a new and uncertain reality is hard enough. Let's remove the worry of judgment from others. In this group, I will help you help yourself so that you can be there for your child, family, loved ones, and for you too. Click the link in the show notes to sign up. You must complete the agreement. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast. I'm Megan Skidmore, your host. Today, I have Josh Scott with me, and I feel so privileged that he has taken time out of his busy schedule to join me and us. Josh is the lead pastor of Grace Point Church out of Nashville, Tennessee. I was there recently, and I wanted to make a point to come and visit your congregation. I had recently met Stan Mitchell, who was the founding pastor at an event I went to in Utah at the Gather Conference. So wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
You gave such a moving and stirring sermon that the day that I visited. I remember very clearly. It was entitled Unlearning Hell.
Yeah.
And it was a good one. And I believe those are recorded, correct? Anybody listening could go and find that and watch that if they wanted to, correct?
Yeah, on our so you could catch the whole service on our Grace Point YouTube page. Grace Point has an E on it when you're looking for us. Or you can go just to our podcast on Apple Music or Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast. You can find just the sermons there.
Right. Yeah, it gave me lots to think about. It gave me, I believe I'd already begun a process of redefining a lot of things, spiritual concepts, religious concepts that I had seen maybe in one way. And the information that you introduced us to during that sermon was really fascinating. I keep remembering about Gehenna. And what the symbolism there, and how so important. It's so important for us to take into context all the things about that society, about those people, about their ways of living, about what they had available and not available to them, and that includes language, the words that they had, and how they used them, and what those meant to them, and why. And we're imposing meaning upon these writings when we interpret them according to our understanding of present day, I think, without taking into context their history and their origin. And so that was an amazing sermon, amazing presentation that you made.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I could tell you did your homework.
I try.
You did, yeah. And I've been able to join you since then virtually, because your services are available virtually, live, as well as post service, because you record them and whatnot. But I particularly, one of the things I really enjoy talking to people about are their faith journeys. You know, as I my own took a pivot a few years back, I shared that with you already. It always touches me when I learn about others and kind of where theirs, we could call it where they started to see things differently. They started to understand things in a new way that they had previously understood and maybe even thought to be absolute. And it's a scary thing, but it's also a beautiful thing when an individual kind of starts to take the reins of their own journey and feels at liberty to do so, meaning you kind of have to arrive to a point where you give yourself permission to do so. And that means going through a lot of emotions and even maybe questioning some of them. For me, some of it was shame, like,
Yeah, for sure.
I'm like that reflected who I was as a person of faith, as a believer, as fill in the blank, right? So you actually shared some of that, the beginnings of your faith journey in that sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hopeful that you could share and maybe expand on that for our listeners and, anything before and since then that you feel is requisite or helpful or needful.
Mm-hmm.
But to kind of give our listeners a foundation of who you are, can you just share a little bit about your background, your origin story, and where you're from? I'm not even sure if you're originally from Tennessee. I forgot to ask you that, like from Nashville.
I'm not. I'm a son of Appalachia. I grew up in the coal fields of southern Appalachia in eastern Kentucky and southwestern West Virginia. My entire family were either coal miners or railroad folks, or in some sort of adjacent kind of business. And I lived there and grew up there. I didn't move until I was 18 or 19 away from there. So and the journey you're discussing on this podcast started for me there as a kid, really.
Okay.
So I grew up in a Free Will Baptist home.
Free Will?
Family. Free Will Baptist.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a new term for me.
So, when you think about Reformed Baptists and what has happened with the Southern Baptist Convention over the last 2 decades, they've become more and more Reformed, more and more Calvinist, right? And Calvinism is the idea of predestination. God predestined some people for heaven, some for hell. Free will is the opposite of that. Free will is this understanding that we are free to make whatever choices we want. Now, the downside of free will is that they taught and still teach, at least my particular branch of it, that you could lose your salvation about as easy as I lose my sunglasses or car keys. And so you never really could be certain or sure or confident or comfortable with where you stood with God, because there's always the off chance that you were going to die or Jesus was going to come back and you would have some unconfessed thing that would rule you out, regardless of how faithful you had been, how much you love God. You'd done 9 things right, you did the 10th one wrong, and you get left out of this thing. So I grew up with just a constant dread of God. I kept being taught about this heaven that I should want to go to, but the only thing in my mind that made heaven better than hell was that there's no fire there, because you still have to deal with this God who is somewhat seemingly abusive and violent and vindictive. And so I just kind of grew up with a lot of fear, religiously induced fear. And of course, the shame and all that goes with it.
Yeah. Was this the faith of your parents and their parents and like
my maternal side? Yeah.
On your maternal side?
My grandfather was actually the pastor, and my faith shift origin story has a lot to do with when he passed. But he was the pastor of our Free Will Baptist Church. So it was very family centered for us. That's where all of our family. Yeah,
really embedded in your roots, very, very deep roots there. So you said your faith journey really kind of started when your grandfather passed. I want to get to that, but really quickly. So you have your parents, you grew up in Appalachia, you siblings, extended family
just
there?
Me. Only child. Yeah.
No cousins or?
And I may have some distant cousins there now, but pretty much all my family has left.
Okay. And so now you live in Nashville. You are lead pastor at Grace Point with an E Church.
That's right.
And I'm sure we will get to how that came about. But share with us about, if you feel comfortable, about your grandfather's passing and what that was like.
Sure. The summer before I turned 12, it was the hardest year. It was 1993. It was the hardest year of my life at that point. And it'd be maybe harder to find one that's been as difficult since, but I'm sure there has. Anyway, my grandfather was the pastor of our church. Earlier that year, his mother, who was my great grandmother, we lived in between them, between my grandpa and his mom, my great grandmother, and they were the 2 pillars of my life. They were the compass. They were the thing that they were my people. In January of that year, she passed from cancer. But then in the summer of that year, my grandpa passed, and he passed in just an awful situation. We were at a church business meeting. There's some conflict in the church at that moment.
Okay.
And somebody told him he was the problem and he should leave. And he had a massive heart attack and died right there on the spot. Now, at 43, I can tell you
Wow.
when there's a terrible coincidence, right? Like that's just an awful coincidence. But at 11, almost 12, I had no frame of reference. I grew up under a sacred canopy that told me, God does everything. If something happens, God's the one who did it. Good, bad, or ugly,
Oh,
God's responsible. And so my grandpa was a good man who I loved dearly. And it just was the moment. I didn't have any answers. I didn't even know what questions to ask. I just knew that the understanding of God I had been given was woefully inadequate to process what I was experiencing. And so,
did you attribute what had happened to your grandfather perhaps to the will of God in some ways?
or to the fact that God wasn't great, that
Uh-huh.
if whatever happened to him, God should have stopped it. God should have done, and so that was the understanding I'd grown up with. And
Right.
so
And
I
your
was given no
12-year-old self.
tools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had no tools, no language, no categories. But it did start to just blow up my worldview, blow up my view
Mm-hmm.
of God, my view of Christianity. And so, for a few years there, I wouldn't have called myself now, looking back, I wouldn't have said I was an atheist because I very much believed in God. I didn't know that you had an option not to believe in God. That's how thoroughly indoctrinated we were. But I
Mm-hmm.
did have a problem with God to the point where I don't want anything to do with God because this God's a jerk was sort of where I was
Mm-hmm.
operating from. And that was, uh, through the rest of elementary/middle and then early into high school. But then when we went to high school, I think my parents had this sense they were losing me religiously. And so they decided we would make a liberal move and that we would join the Southern Baptist Church. That was seen as a liberal move because we came out of the Free Will Baptist, which was King James only, hellfire and damnation. You never knew who was going to preach or what was going to be sung. It was all led by the Spirit in the moment. And you go to the Southern Baptist Church where they're reading the NIV and their services are planned and they have a band. And, well, when I first went there, it was a piano and organ, but still that was better than what we had. We didn't have anything. And so they decided we need to get him in the best youth group in town and maybe we'll be able to salvage, get him reconnected to faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when very quickly I got involved in a youth group, somehow became a leader. I was a shy kid. I don't know how that happened. And ended up around the age of 15, 16. I gave my first sermons.
Wow. At 15 and 16.
Yeah, sometime
Great.
around there,
That's
almost
great.
30 years ago, which is hard to believe. And for me, it was like in the Southern Baptist world, the only thing that you need to be qualified is not like a good education or like the thing you need to have to be able to say, I want to preach and somebody lets you is you have to say you're called and be a man. That's it. That's the
Mm-hmm.
qualification. It's a very low bar. And so they just turned me loose on this preaching circuit in Appalachia, where I was going and giving sermons, and I was saying what I'd been taught to say, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I knew like I guess this is true, but it's not very good. It's not good news. There's nothing good about it. It seems to only make people feel worse
So you were
and more
thinking
fearful.
that, but didn't
Yeah,
necessarily say that out loud.
because I didn't know that I had an option. It was sort of like this
Yeah.
is the truth,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to preach the truth. And so, this first several years, I'm so glad I started preaching in the era of cassette tapes that really nobody listens to anymore. Maybe those have been all destroyed, and there's no paper trail.
But yet, Josh, that's a part of your history. It's a part of what made you who you are today.
That's right.
And one of the things that I really, really want to normalize is, like you said, you never really became an atheist, but you didn't really want anything to do with God. And I'd even love to be able to normalize if you had gone through a period. I'm just saying if, for anybody who's listening,
Sure.
of you decided you didn't believe that for however period of time, let's take the shame away from that because it's okay. That's part of the learning and growing and experiencing process. We can't fully experience
Yeah.
one thing if we don't have the option of experiencing kind of the opposition or the opposite of that.
That's right.
I think.
I definitely hit periods later where I'm pastoring a church and I'm really unsure if maybe I'm an atheist, maybe I'm going to leave Christianity in the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Those were very real. Once I finally hit the point where sort of all those early questions came flooding back, and it was always just experience related, right? It was having experiences of people in high school and college that didn't fit the boxes my tradition had given me,
Mm-hmm.
and having to wrestle with, like, what if I can't believe that? What if I
Mm-hmm.
can't, affirm that? And that for me was way more challenging than maybe the initial experience.
Tell
Um,
us why, if you don't mind me pausing there, that was even more challenging.
yeah, well, I'm in my early 20s at that point,
Uh-huh.
newly married,
Uh-huh.
no kids yet, but needing to like have a paycheck, and feeling like there's so much I'm going through. And this was before like people were talking about deconstruction. This is, I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking 2004, 5, 6.
Right.
Um, and so it was very lonely because there was really nobody I knew who was having a similar experience.
Yeah.
And so I really just ended up getting stumbling my way into finding certain voices like Rob Bell, who then led me to Brian McLaren and John Dominic Crossan and Marcus Borg and some of these other folks who've been saying really brilliant things for a long time. We just weren't allowed, like nobody told me that there were options or there were other voices.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was hard about it was just, going through it alone, and really being pastored and led through print media, through other people's words, but having no way, like no one to process it with, no one to talk to about it. That was just very incredibly lonely, and I was afraid because I didn't want to lose my job, and because I didn't want, I didn't want to go to hell, and all the number of things. But I wasn't even sure I believed in God anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah.
was really challenging, and having to get up every Sunday, especially like now, Easter and Christmas are some of my favorites. But back then, when Easter and Christmas would roll around, I would just feel that this existential dread of not being able to say what they wanted me to say, and trying to figure out, how do I say anything with integrity that also doesn't get me fired. That was a real
Mm-hmm.
challenge for several years.
And I just want to validate that and thank you for being willing to be real and open about that, because there are so many moving parts to these journeys. There are so many things that are tied into them that are valid. And when something does feel so life or death, it makes it really hard to to be open, to be authentic, to be real, to be raw, to be human. And I hope to make space in Christianity, in all faith communities, for the entire length of the spectrum of belief or experience or
Mhm.
what it is you're going through. Because I mean, that's one of the main reasons you practice a faith with others, is for that community, for that communal connection and that feeling of love and support and belonging. Without that, I mean, a person can go and experience God in their own way, you know,
Sure,
one
sure.
on one or in
It,
nature or wherever.
and I think one of the most dehumanizing things religion can do, it's not just picking at individual people's lives and saying, well, if you love this person, you're out, or if you don't believe in this doctrine, you're out. Like at the core of all that is this dehumanization that essentially says, if you are any part actual human, if you have human doubts, if you have human questions, if you have human experiences that cause you to wrestle with your faith, that somehow that's the ultimate unfaithfulness.
Right.
When one of the things I kept doing was I kept engaging the Bible because I loved it, and I still love it. I love the Bible. But one of the things I did is I kept reading it, and the more I would read it, the more I would notice things. Like the time when the man comes to Jesus, asks for healing for his son who has an unclean spirit, and
Mm-hmm.
he says, if it's possible, and Jesus says everything's possible for the person who believes, and the guy goes, oh, I believe. Help my unbelief. Like, to me, that is the most beautiful picture of what it means to be a person of faith on a journey. It's, oh yeah, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
but also there's this other part of me, like maybe 2/3 of me right now, that's
Mm-hmm.
having a hard time finding anything that seems like belief. And that mustard seed amount was good enough for Jesus. Like, oh yeah, okay, that means you're paying attention. So I want to believe just as good as I believe for Jesus.
Yeah, I love that. I've always really appreciated the mustard seed analogy as well. It's a really tiny seed.
It is. Yeah.
Uh, so I want to go back to something you said. One of the things I like to talk about is when we actually experience a paradigm shift, we're able to reframe something. You've said more than once, nobody told me that, not believing these things was an option, meaning when you were
Mm-hmm.
going and giving those sermons as a teen, right? And you said it again just a bit ago. Nobody told me, fill in the blank. I think in order to have a paradigm shift, we have to come to this point where we realize I'm the one who gets to
Mm-hmm.
tell me my inner knowing, my inner wisdom is who, what has the answers for me in my specific
Mm-hmm.
situation. Some people will call that, the spirit. Uh, there's different ways of referring to that inner voice, and I'm not here to say which
Mm-hmm.
one is the right one or the best one or any of that. But when it comes to kind of these bigger topics, that's a process to come to this
Mm-hmm.
place of kind of giving yourself permission. It's okay for me. I'm acknowledging this is what's going on, right? Because up until you do that, it's kind of an internal battle against
Mm-hmm.
your own words of wisdom inside your own inner voice.
And there was what happened for me is there was an intuition that because I kept going like the things that I'm saying I don't think are good. And it was hearing some other voices who then started saying things that I was like, yeah, that's how I've felt.
Other
So
voices
so
meaning from other people.
yeah, so like reading, I'll never forget reading
Oh,
Brian
okay.
McLaren's book, A Generous Orthodoxy, and just feeling like I could never have articulated that at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
that was everything I wanted to say. You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
somehow gave me words that helped me articulate what experience I was having. And there has to be another way to be Christian that isn't the way I'd been taught, because the way I'd been taught just did not feel. And I know people say, oh, you can't trust your feelings. I disagree. I think that our
Mm-hmm.
feelings actually matter. They're part of the human experience. And there was just something that never set right. I was just never settled in. And so hearing other voices say, and then hearing from my own internal voice say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's what you've been thinking. You just didn't know how to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Or that's what you've been curious about. You just didn't know you could be curious about openly. And so that was for me, just I devoured so many books in
Yeah.
those years that just gave
Yeah.
me language that helped, you know, it was resonated in a way and in the process, I ended up loving Jesus more, loving scripture. Like I also felt that sense of like, this is something I could love. I could love this tradition. I could be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that for me it was difficult, but also when the light bulb started going on a little bit, it was so exciting, terrifying, and
Yes.
thrilling at the same time.
Yes, and I have learned we are able to hold two seemingly conflicting, even opposing emotions in one place. I've
Yeah,
decided we have seen opposition for far too long as a negative thing. I think of opposition just as that natural push and pull, contracting and releasing of our energy, maybe within ourselves or within groups that really and truly help humanity move forward. We need it. It's not as binary as good versus evil.
sure.
That's not. And so you were allowing that, you were living that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, and I mean, and very much when I describe the New Testament, people like Paul, what I'll often tell people is these are not people with a systematic theology. These are people who are literally building the plane as they fly it. And that's very much what it felt like for me. Like, we're about 10,000 feet and I'm like the wing is coming off, so I'm ripping off some duct tape and trying to stick the wing back on. That was really what the experience and still in some ways feels like, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the difference now and then is, 20 years ago, it was probably more terrifying than it was exhilarating. And now it's really not terrifying. It's just exhilarating.
So, okay, so that's a great point. Can you speak to that? How you got from, a couple decades ago from putting on the duct tape and the terrifying and exhilarating to now mostly exhilarating. Like, how does one move through that and get to the point where, okay, you were reading a lot of others' words and writings were resonating with you. It helped to, you could relate and it validated your experience. And I think in some ways helped you create more confidence, more self-belief, knowing you weren't alone. And then what? Right? Clearly there's, you've a lot of growth has happened.
Yeah. I mean, part of it was just starting to say it out loud in the church I was pastoring at the time. It was a little church that was non-denominational. It had Southern Baptist roots, but was non-denominational. And I finally just started having to say things like, I can no longer keep this in. And as you imagine, that was a challenge for a lot of people because they were used to hearing that
from you.
Yeah, oh, but you used to say this, and now you're saying something else. And that was but it also was at the same time freeing. Like I finally got to raise in a sermon, hey, maybe the way we've always been taught about this isn't actually the way it is.
Yeah. So, two-part question. Did you have fears that you would then either lose, faith community members, attendees, whatever, both in a sense of as friends, but also in the sense of you would lose members of your congregation? And then the second part is, how did you move forward regardless of that fear?
Yeah. Well, of course there was that fear, and it was realized. We lost a lot of, I mean, when I laid all my cards on the table for our leadership, our elder board at the time, and just said, here's where I'm at on LGBTQ inclusion and marriage. Here's where I am on atonement theory. Here's where I am on the Bible. And just, I took a meeting, and it was like, looking back, I probably should have done a series of meetings with my board, but instead it was like one 8-hour meeting where I just like, here, let me tell you everything I think today. And I just sort of said to them, like, I realize this may not be the journey this church needs to take or wants to take, but it's the journey I must take. So if you'd rather me resign, I'll resign, and you all can find somebody and keep going the direction you're going. And to their credit, to a person, they all said, no, this is the journey the church needs to take. Now, they were all gone, probably, most of them, like, 2/3 of them were gone within a year. They were part of the casualty of that journey. So yeah, we lost people, and I knew that would be challenging. We were if you can imagine, Kentucky's a red state where we were. If you can imagine the deepest shade of red possible, and that was the little town we were doing this in. And so there very much was. But also what was happening is there were people who were coming back to church who had essentially been forced out in their lifetime. I'll never forget one Sunday morning after communion, a woman came over to me who was just weeping, and she said, I grew up Catholic, and when I came out, I got kicked out. And so I'm actually a minister in another religion now. I'm not even Christian anymore, but I came here to see friends today, and I got in line, and nobody told me no, but they served me communion and told me that I was beloved by God. And she said, I'll never be Christian again. The pain is too deep. But today was a big first step of healing.
Wow.
And that's why when, a group of people sent a messenger to me to tell me what I had to do to keep them at our church. And these are folks who had been around a long time. And a lot of them were, I'm sure, good contributors. I stayed out of that, but I'm just guessing. And they sent me a list of demands, and I heard them out and just eventually had to say, look, there are 60 some other churches around us who can do exactly what you're asking for, but I have a room full of people who have nowhere else to go. So if you're telling me right now that I have to pick between them and you, I will pick them every time.
Wow, that is courageous.
And it was, of course they all left, right? And yet at the same time, and I felt bad for them because their church had changed because I had changed it. So there was a real grief for them there. And, at the time I was probably too bullheaded to realize I'm not the only one dealing with something here. Actually, these folks are dealing with the church they had helped start and be a part of is no longer a thing they recognize or want to be a part of. And that had to hurt and be hard. And so, I look back on that now and know that, but also there was a sense afterward of now we can really explore the folks who are saying, well, don't ask that question aren't saying that now. And so we were a smaller community, but we were much tighter knit, and we were experiencing transformation and growth. And, there were people at the time who were driving almost 2 hours to come to church on Sunday morning. This was in the late, talking 2016, 17, 18. Because they wanted to go to a church that was doing this, that was opening these conversations up. And so it was challenging. There was fear, but it was also, one of the things when have a vision and a conviction, and that's sort of the North Star, then it's helpful. It helps you make tough decisions.
Yeah.
And so human flourishing had become my North Star, that, whatever, for something to be good, it has to lead human beings to flourish. It can't be them
Absolutely.
cutting off parts of who they are to fit into a stringent
Right.
doctrinal system. And so that helped me just realize, like, we're going to go through some stuff that's going to be challenging, but we know, like, I know deep in my bones where this thing needs to head. And it needs to head toward a place where all humans can flourish as God created them to flourish.
I just want to speak to, words just don't describe or adequately express how difficult that must have been, that time period, and I appreciate you acknowledging the struggle, the sadness maybe that they might have felt in seeing what they had found it evolve and change, and acknowledging that. And yet maybe it was okay for them to experience a little bit of what some of you said people were coming back who had felt pushed out.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's that concept of there's opposition, meaning there's always going to be those opposing forces that exist naturally in our universe. And sometimes that we're just talking about, the North and South magnetic pole, but other times we're talking about with humans and their lives and the reality of those lived experiences. So I just, kudos to you for knowing your convictions, being values driven, and knowing that as hard as this might be, that you felt deeply in your bones that this is where the direction it needed to take. And so that congregation is not the one that you're currently at, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Correct.
So you made those significant shifts,
yeah.
Well before you found your place where you're at now. And that was
That's
in
right.
Kentucky.
That was in South Central Kentucky, rural South Central Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And in like 2014, I had met Stan Mitchell, who's the founding pastor of Grace Point. We become friends, and I became friends with other staff there. We got pretty close. And it was in 2018, Stan reached out to me. I'd been in, the church I was at for almost 14 years. So I grew up there. Wow. And literally,
yes, Stan, you did.
Stan reached out to me and he said, "Hey, can we grab lunch?" And so I met him for lunch, and he said, "I'm in the process of transitioning out of the lead pastor role to a founding pastor role, and I'm going to go put a lot of my energy elsewhere. They're going to be looking for a new lead pastor, and he said, I'm not controlling the process. I'm just giving them names, and I would like for you to apply." And I said, "Okay." And there was a long, ridiculous story, but eventually applied and eventually took my name out of consideration. There was a lot going on at the church in Kentucky that needed to stabilize, and I felt like I'd be leaving them in the lurch.
Okay.
But it was really after the first of the next year, 2019, in probably February, we'd made hard decisions and that I needed to make, right? Like I needed to be the one to have hard discussions with staff members to say, "Hey, this position's not going to be around anymore," or "This position's getting cut back," or, I felt compelled to be the one to do those things.
Okay.
But then once we had sort of balanced out a little bit, I also was sort of realizing, I think I've taken this church through so much, through shifting atonement theories, through LGBTQ plus inclusion, through the Trump presidential campaign, which also put the first one, which put lots of folks were not happy with how I approached that, as far as just being outspoken against the things he was saying and doing the whole time. And I just realized I'm probably not going to be the person to like give this thing the shot in the arm it needs to thrive. And so I reached back out to Grace Point, and the rest is history. I started there on Easter of 2019. We had a great 11-month run before COVID, and then we've been finding our way ever since.
So that was just a little over 5 years ago, going on 5.5 years, and you have been there. Yep. So prior to COVID, was it only in person?
We would video the sermons and post them like the next day, but the services weren't live streamed.
Okay. Yeah. So you have a lot of experience where you have had doubts come up, and with those doubts always accompany questions. That's another theme of this podcast, how I'm trying to shed a different light on having doubts and peel back that shame, peel back the negative connotation that often accompanies them, especially when you come from a conservative faith background.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is, with Christianity because that's my background, but I have talked with others of other faiths, and it exists. It
Mm-hmm.
exists there too.
Yeah.
Can you've said parts of this, I believe already, but how has asking questions and doubts actually not just helped you in your faith journey, but like actively helped you in cultivating your relationship with the divine, with God,
Yeah.
with the universe, however a person describes that connection?
And science and religion aren't the same thing, right?
Right.
Science tries to tell us how, religious tries to help us make sense of why. But there's something about the scientific method that I think is interesting, which is the scientific method is you come up with a hypothesis. You have a question, you come up with a hypothesis, and then you test it
Mm.
to see how it works. And for me, that's really what faith has been like. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to come up with like, here's the question I'm carrying. Here's kind of my hunch. And now I'm going to go explore that. And for me, it has been an unleashing of curiosity, which has also led to an unleashing of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you can't be curious, you can't be creative. If you start an experiment knowing what the outcome has to be, it's not really an
Mm-hmm.
experiment. And so being able to say everything's on the table, I'm writing very little down in Sharpie. I'm writing most things in pencil. And um, it's interesting to see where you go with that. And in my church, my previous church, I haven't done this at Grace Point yet, but one of the things I did one Sunday is I gave everybody a Sharpie, a pencil, and an index card. And I said, write everything down that is Sharpie for you that you will not change. And what was interesting by the end of the sermon, people were like, can I get a new card? I think I put too much in Sharpie, because I think people realize, like, a lot of this stuff is, the more you learn, you have experiences, you learn, you ask questions, you learn. And sometimes the things you thought were just it aren't. I mean, one of the things that has been further, deepened is my conviction that God is love, at the very core of who God is.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and when people will ask, because I get asked all the time, especially by people who are on the other side of most of the issues I'm on a particular perspective of, I say, what if you're wrong? That's the big one that's supposed to get you, right? Like, what if you're wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And my stock response now is, oh, I'm sure, 1,000% sure I'm wrong about some
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I just don't know what it is, or I would change it right now. But I do have this conviction that where I'm not wrong because I went too far. I'm not wrong because I thought God was too loving, too compassionate, too generous.
Yeah.
I haven't overestimated God. I haven't become nicer than God. Where I'm wrong, it's because I have not fully leaned in or gone far enough into love, compassion, mercy, and generosity. And so I just lead with the assumption that whatever the word God points to is a reality and mystery that is better than anything I can conjure up.
Wow, I
And
love that. Wow, I love that
so
so much.
that,
Yeah.
that takes the fear out of it. Well, what if I'm wrong? Yeah, I'm definitely wrong. And I hope that I'll stay open and malleable so that God can lead me to become more
Yeah.
loving, lead me to become
Yeah.
more compassionate. And for me, that's sort of a litmus test for how's it going? How's my faith? Am I becoming more compassionate, more expansive, or am I becoming more cynical and closed off?
Yeah.
Um, and I do want to say also, in this whole process,
Yes.
over these 20 years, there's a grieving process. I went through a real angry period.
Mm-hmm.
I went through a real cynical period. That is a natural phenomenon. That's what grief does to you. Like, you go through stages with grief.
Mm-hmm.
And so that
That,
it's definitely, I've done that, and for sure. But to your earlier point, I've also been able to come around and look at my upbringing and say, I disagree with almost all their theological conclusions, but I'm really glad they taught me to love the Bible, even though I love it in a different way than they do. And even though I think it's a different thing than they think it is, I'm
mm-hmm.
really glad that like a bunch of it's in there, because some of it, the good parts, made its way into my heart, and have
Mm-hmm.
helped keep transforming me over my life.
That's a really healthy approach. And I think it bears, noting and repeating that it is, I think it's a good thing to acknowledge and honor in as far as we feel safe and it feels healthy to do so. Those who came before us and kind of had some paving stones set for us to try and learn a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
language of sorts. We don't have to throw it all out. And I love how you are able to see, some good things and you're not viewing it in this either or mindset. Really healthy. I think that's really healthy.
Haven't always been that way. I
Well,
think
that's
it's a sign of,
fair.
I hope it's a sign of
That's
maturity in the last few years that I've been able to come back to it that way.
And that's fair. I mean, it's good that you pointed out you had an angry period. I have had angry periods, and I probably haven't seen the end of them. I think a faith journey, healing, life, all of those things, they're not linear. I think they're cyclical, right? Kind of like they come in waves, and sometimes they're more intense, sometimes less so. But it's all ultimately just for our good, for our learning, for our growth, our expansion, even. I believe it's all necessary. If you don't have something that's opposite of what you currently have, then you don't really, there's no reference point to give it meaning, or there's
Mhm.
less of a reference point to give it actual meaning. I love the Sharpie and pencil analogy. And what I love even more, this is another thing I like to touch on, is you're encouraging your faith community just by going through the Sharpie versus pencil exercise. You're encouraging them. What are your doubts? What are your questions? What are the things you're uncertain about? And that helps to peel away any negative or shameful connotation associated with, I don't know. I
Mhm.
am really not sure. And I think, wow, that would make for a healthy addition, I believe, to a lot of discussions that happen on Sundays. So I've kept you a while. I guess one quick question. Okay, I don't know, quick or not. How has your faith journey been different than maybe what you thought it was going to be? And then the last question that I always like to wrap up with is, what does it mean to you to live beyond the shadow of doubt? I purposely dropped that A of a very common phrase said among conservative communities when they profess to know something with absolute certainty. They'll say,
Mhm.
I know this beyond the shadow of a doubt. And I have changed the way that I view that. And so
Mhm.
I purposely dropped the A.
Yeah. You know, my journey's been surprising in that I thought I would be Southern Baptist pastor, maybe work for the Kentucky Baptist Convention,
Mm-hmm.
climb the ranks, you know,
Wow.
and
Okay.
it's been the best surprise in the world to go on this journey and
Mm-hmm.
realize, just things like I would say that the more I've gone on this journey, the more I've been able to open my heart up to the mystical and the uncertain, right? So that I know there are folks if from my conservative tradition that I grew up in. If I were to tell them what I mean by the word God, they would say I'm an atheist. And yet, if I were to tell an atheist what I mean by the word God, they would say you're not an atheist. Because I don't think those are the only two options. I think there's a God beyond theism and atheism that is here and now and reality, capital R, that can be experienced. And so, that has shocked me that the more I've moved into this, as people say, like, "Oh no, you're moving farther away from your God," and actually,
Mm-hmm.
no, I've moved into a deeper place with the divine, and that has been really surprising and really beautiful.
I love
Um,
that.
I don't know that I'll ever be beyond the shadow of doubt. I think that perhaps that place, and so at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, the risen Jesus meets his disciples on top of a mountain in Galilee, and there's when he meets them, it's right before he does the Great Commission bit. The text says most translations read like this: "They worshipped, but some doubted." That's the way they mostly read, but that's
Right.
not what it says. In the original Greek in the New Testament, it says they worshipped and doubted. The same people.
Mm.
There's not like a group over here going, "We're not worthy," and then another group going over here going like, "I'm not sure I buy this." It's like in one breath they're going, of course," and the other breath they're going, "I'm not sure I buy this." And for me, that is really the only space we get to occupy, because even people who claim to have certainty, they just don't, because it doesn't
Right.
exist. It just doesn't exist, and it's kind of a fruitless pursuit because you can never have it. What we can have is conviction. What we can have is a growing, alive faith.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, if anything helps me in that moment of living between sort of I believe, help my unbelief, between worshiping and doubting, is this idea that whatever the word God means, it is not some reality that we're trying to pull out of the Stone Age and say, God, you actually need to be better now because it's a modern world. God has always been out in front of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
inviting us forward. calling us forward. And sometimes we resist that call and we make terrible decisions. I mean, the last 400 years in the United States, even before the US, but through the colonial project and everything we've done since, we see humans making bad decisions. And yet sometimes we've seen humans rise up and make really beautiful decisions and have powerful, beautiful visions that call people to a better kind of humanity. I think that's what God's out in front of us doing all the time. I'm not trying to make God nicer. I would love for some of their followers to be nicer, because I think it reflects the love and the compassion and the heart of God for the world. So just for me, it's the conviction that whatever I think God is better.
I just love hearing your journey, your take on things. I love hearing ideas that might be different than what I understand or have been taught. Or I love you brought up the curiosity piece, right? When we give ourselves permission, and that just everything blows open. We have more curiosity, we have more creativity. There's just more things that I believe reflect a divine being, truly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have loved this. I love the way you present things. I love what you share. It's beautiful. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are more than welcome. So just so that our listeners can get to know you on a more personal level, I have a few questions. I'm just looking for 1-word answers, maybe 2.
Sure.
You game? Okay. So tell us your favorite book, or a favorite book.
So hard. I think it has to be probably Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time by Marcus Borg.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I've not heard of that one. Okay. Do you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm, deep down, I'm an introvert. I think it takes a lot of energy. My extroverting takes a lot of energy.
I caught that about your youth. Yeah.
I have a friend who says I'm an ambivert, which means you're kind of an introvert, but at times when you're comfortable with people, when I go to a party my friends are having, I'm the extrovert in the room. When I go to a party where I don't know people, I'm just banking on my wife keeping me from looking weird because I'm not talking. So I think I dabble. My work
kind of
demands,
go back and forth.
My work demands extroversion.
Yeah.
But at the end of it,
space.
I go home and collapse, right?
That fits. Everything that you've shared with us about you, that fits. Tell us your favorite artist.
Like music artist, painting artist?
You pick the genre, yeah.
I have loved the band U2 for about as long as I can remember. And so just can never get enough.
Yes. Love them as well. Good choice. Are you a night owl or morning lark?
Oh, night owl. I hate mornings so bad. Like I'm not good at them. Just not good at mornings. Don't like them.
Amazing. Do you do still or carbonated water, or do you do diet soda or something else? What's your favorite?
My favorite, I'm gonna say, is Coke Zero. But if I really do I have a dear friend from the UK who, anytime we go out and eat a meal together, he'll ask if they have the water with the gas. And I never really tried it before. I never really tried it beforehand, but carbonated water, seltzer water, I prefer, just because it gives you a little something.
Fancy water. I've heard it called fancy water and angry water. Do you have a celebrity crush, or who is your celebrity crush?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Wasn't expecting that. If I had a celebrity crush at one point, the last time I probably thought about the question, it would have probably been Jenna Fisher, who played Pam on The Office.
Okay.
Which is the last time I really thought about the question.
Yeah. That's fun. Okay. And then finally, the furthest place that you have traveled. Hawaii. That's a good place to travel.
Yes.
So Josh, I will leave the link to the Grace Point Church website, but anything else you'd like to let listeners know about different things that you offer or have available?
Yeah. So if you go to joshscott.online, that's my Substack.
Okay.
And I haven't written as much as I'd like to because I've been publishing books, but when I do have time to write additional stuff, I do it there, joshscott.online. I'm on TikTok, Josh_A_Scott. Same thing with Instagram, and currently still on Twitter, but I don't know what's going to happen with that. All Josh at Josh_A_Scott. And
so
then
it's the same on all of them. The same on all platforms. Josh_A_Scott. Okay.
Yep. And then I have 2 books out right now. The first is called Bible Stories for Grown-ups, Reading Scripture with New Eyes. And the second is called Context, Putting Scripture in Its Place. And those are both out now. And my third book comes out in February, and it's called Parables, Putting Jesus' Stories in Their Place.
Nice. Okay. Well, I'll leave links to all of that in the show notes. That is
Thank
awesome.
you.
Yes. Can't wait to share your light and your love with the listeners of this podcast. You're so welcome.
Thanks for what you're doing. This is beautiful.
Absolutely. Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, which is part of the Dialogue Journal found at dialoguejournal.com. Founder Eugene England was a Mormon writer, teacher, and scholar who wrote, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue. My hope is that this podcast is an extension of that vision." Brene Brown said, "Living into our values means that we do more than profess our values. We practice them. We walk our talk. We are clear about what we believe and hold important, and we take care that our intentions, words, thoughts, and behaviors align with those beliefs." End quote. Before you can walk your talk, you must identify what your core values are. Identifying your core values is like thinking ahead of time. It reduces decision fatigue. It becomes your North Star, guiding you as you navigate new decisions or decisions you've come to realize that perhaps you didn't get to choose in the first place. Click the link in the show notes for my Determine Your Values guide. It will help you take the first steps to living a values-driven and aligned life by helping you identify what matters most. Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more, or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.